Okay, we should probably get started. I recognize also that YouTube has a little bit of a lag in transmission. So it's possible that right now, as you guys are watching it, it's actually 3 minutes or maybe even 4 minutes over. So apologies for that. But welcome everyone. And thank you so much for joining us in this really hectic Isea schedule, and also, a really hectic schedule for everyone in general. Before we start today's amazing proceedings, I would love to acknowledge our presence on the traditional territories of many indigenous nations, and to recognize their longstanding relationships with these territories on which York University campuses are located that precedes the establishment of the university. Of course, we are currently on virtual territory, and so I want to also include that the virtual networks on which these activities and this particular gathering is situated is a product of the Silicon Valley and Zoom's headquarters that are located on Muwekma Ohlone territory. So in the broader scope, the area known as Takaronto has been taken care by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. Our home, Toronto, now is also home to many Indigenous people, and we acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And this territory is subject to the Dish Wish One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, and agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So thank you again for joining us. Today we have three amazing guests, David Hahn, Michaela, and Alison. And today's panel will also be moderated by Melanie Wilmink. And this panel actually comes in the general scheme of the Isea, of the Sensorium exhibition at Isea. And basically, Sensorium is a digital, is a organized research unit at York University in Toronto that focuses on digital technologies and digital cultures. And so today, I will be very, very happy to hand you over to Melanie. But I also want to mention that tomorrow we will have another panel from the curators and myself about the exhibition itself. And if you would like to, you can also follow us and go to our website, Sensorium, at sensorium.ampd.yorku.ca. Okay, so without further ado, Melanie Wilmink.
Thank you very much for that great introduction, Joel. Joel, when you get a chance, do you also want to just pop the link to the Sensorium exhibition in the YouTube chat window? Might be great as well. So we really encourage you all to take a look at the exhibition. We've got three amazing artists here today who have been included in this virtual exhibition. And all three of them are graduate students at York University and participants in the Sensorium Research Collective. And we're very excited to have them here today. I didn't really prepare any biographical information. All of that information is on our website. I thought we'd just get right into it and start the conversation. The way that I'm picturing it, and we've sort of discussed having 15 minutes of just introduction from each of the artists to tell you a little bit about themselves and about their work. And then we're going to roll into questions. And I have some questions prepared. And we also welcome any sort of questions from either the YouTube chat or the internal Isea chat system. Please post your questions there. We've got a couple of people monitoring, and hopefully we can integrate them into the conversation. And we'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts. If you haven't had a chance to see the artist's work on the website, please go ahead and check that out later. We've got capsules that sort of cover a brief synopsis of their research. And then all three of these artists today actually have links that you can actually experience the work in person as virtual experiences. So I highly encourage you to go ahead and do that. So I guess we'll get started. I'm just going to go in order of the people sort of as they're laid out here in my Zoom chat window. So I'd like to start with David Hahn. David, would you mind introducing yourself just briefly and taking 5 minutes to just tell us a little bit about your project? And don't forget that you're all muted.
Right. Can you hear me? Awesome. Hi. Thanks for having me. Thanks for including me in this talk. My name is David Hahn. I'm one half of a collective called Friend Generator. and our collective of two, I guess, we're interested in making or looking into virtual reality and sort of pushing the boundaries of VR. And we're really heavily invested in considering the role the body plays in VR experiences, but not only just VR experiences, as with this latest project with digitally mediated experiences in general. So the project that we've made for this exhibit is called Is There a Way to Be Gone and Still Belong? It's a screen-based interactive experience. It's been developed in Unity, which is the game development engine. And so it has sort of a game-like feel to it. You know, you use the keyboard and mouse to navigate the world. It's a virtual environment. And I thought maybe instead of me kind of describing what it is, that if it's possible for me to share my screen, I could just kind of really quickly show it. Is that possible? So
we'll see if Alana is still available to help us do that.
It looks like,
I think it should be, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. This is
Great.
it? Okay, cool. So right now I'm just in the Unity environment. We have a build available online, but I thought this might just be a little bit easier. And we'll see if this cooperates. Okay, so we've created a virtual environment. Kind of looks like this. Sorry, I'm just going to. It has this sort of aesthetic. You can kind of navigate it, and it's quite a large environment. And we've populated it with the recorded movement of dancers we've collaborated with. So this is one of our dancers that we've collaborated with. I've just was working on this right now. So what you're seeing is the movement over time of a dance artist. This particular dance artist practices traditional Indian dance, actually. And I conducted these interviews with these dance artists to kind of think about what how they imagine themselves being represented in this world. So that's one of them, and you can kind of see it's kind of reflecting their movement over time. All right, and I'll show you another one if I can get there. Just in here. This dance artist in here, Emily Law, she practices a form called whacking, which it's a dance form that came out of the sort of 70s disco gay scene in New York. And when I conducted my interview with her, she was actually 4 months pregnant, and so she was thinking a lot about her baby in her womb, and sort of while moving and recording the dances. And so this is sort of reflective of that idea of a womb and disco sort of combined, a disco womb, if you will. So the world is sort of populated with various recorded movements that were recorded from these dance artists that we collaborated with. The prompt that I had given all of these dance artists was to think about the body as an archive, and what it means to go through that archive of movement and explore that archive of embodied knowledge. And so the idea here is that we, this is Maxine Hepner, another dance artist based in Toronto, modern, coming from a sort of modern or contemporary dance style. And our interest here is really kind of thinking about, you know, as we're forced to kind of communicate with each other through these mediated forms like Zoom, what is being lost, and potentially working with emerging forms of technology like these depth sensors, like these game engines, to kind of reach towards what might be gained or recovered, since we can no longer since communicating in person or in embodied ways is becoming increasingly difficult. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I'll let the build, I just want to make a note that if you are going to download the build, it's constantly being updated. So if you are finding that it's not working or you're getting bugs or whatever, we're constantly upgrading it. And but the build right now has what you see here mostly, and it should mostly work. So I think that's about it.
We invite people to join us in the beta test process, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So
Thank you so much, David. That was perfect. That's a really lovely way to sort of pause and transition to some of the other artists as well, who I think are sharing a lot of the same concerns about the body and how we interact with one another in the virtual. So in my Zoom space here, Michaela is next on the docket. So Michaela, if you could just introduce yourself very briefly and take 5 minutes to just tell us a bit about your project. And don't forget your mute button.
Unmute. So my name is Michaela Pnacekova. I'm a Slovak interactive creator and a producer, and a PhD student at York University in Toronto. And my project is called Symphony of Noise VR, which actually premiered already last year at Reeperbahn Music Festival, VRAM, and ITFA Top Lab. And this year, and then it had a larger break due to Corona times, but now it picked up its journey again, and we're very happy that Isea 2020 is showing it. And at the same time, also it was shown now at LEV Matadero Vortex exhibition, and there are 2 other festivals coming up, which I'm not sure if I can announce, so I rather will be silent for that. Symphony of Noise VR is an interactive room scale sonic experience. It was inspired by Matthew Herbert, a musician who calls himself also a sound documentarian. So he collects sounds and makes music from them. And this is what inspired us to bring this into virtual reality and use spatial sound and binaural sound and see how we can not only collect sounds around us, but also make sounds through our bodies in VR, and how can we then create a personalized score through or with algorithms. Yeah. I don't know whether I shall say more. I mean, the interactive piece is there to download as a build from Steam. So basically, you just click on a button, which will bring you to a Google form, and we will send you a code that you can use to download it from the Steam website or Steam app, and it's for tethered headsets, Oculus Rift S, HTC Vive Pro. It works also on Valve, I think, and if you have Oculus Quest and you can link it to a PC, it works there as well.
Michaela, can you actually just take 1 more minute to just describe what the VR environment looks like, maybe? Just because we got some nice visuals from David, so maybe if you can describe it at all.
I was thinking I can actually share the trailer here. If you,
it's okay. I think we'll just
okay.
Just give us a quick description of what it looks like.
So there's it's difficult to describe. So it's a journey. It's a journey through from your inner world into the outer world, where you create sounds through breathing. So you first enter a first space where you breathe into objects and you interact with your controllers. Then you're taken to a second space where you interact with your voice. And then you take into a third space where you interact with your hands. And basically those are 3 parts of a composition. So the first one, breathing, is bass. The voice is melody, and the third the drum is the rhythm. So those are the three parts of the composition, and it all comes together in the fourth space, where all the objects and all the sounds merge together.
That's perfect. Thank you. It's very visual. Sometimes it's just nice to have some sort of like visual description of what you see inside the space. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michaela. So last but not least, we'll move on to Alison Humphrey. Alison, you know the drill, 5 minutes. Tell us a bit about yourself and your piece. Don't forget to unmute.
Thanks so much. I'm going to share my screen as well, just to show some visuals. So here we go. So my name is Alison Humphrey, and I am, like the other two, in the PhD program at York University in Cinema and Media Studies. And I've been working on a project called Shadowpox, which is what I'm calling citizen science fiction. Let's see, is everybody seeing the shared screen? It's good. Cool. So the basic idea is that Shadowpox is a science fictional virus made of shadows, viral shadows that multiply and spread across the body. And as they do, they pull light and heat from you until you potentially die of hypothermia. So it's a motion tracked projection mapped on the body, basic technology of motion tracking and projection mapping and generative visual effects. And these were all programmed by Lelaine Hewlett-Destaggio, who's the technical director on Shadowpox, using a Kinect Motion Center and HT projector. This is basically what the Kinect structured light looks like when it's tracking you in infrared, so kind of reminds you of measles in the first place. And using technology to kind of blend the two. The idea is basically to think about immunity as a superpower. And action refraction is the term that I'm using to kind of use science fiction in order to refract a concept like vaccination that when it's kind of in reality can be a little bit too hot to handle. So kind of playing around with the idea of community immunity or herd immunity, which has been in the news a little bit lately. And there have been three basic pieces of the Shadowpox project. The first one was a game called The Antibody Politic, which was an installation, gallery installation, and basically had people kind of choosing at the very beginning whether to vaccinate or not, and then seeing what happens, what were the implications of their vaccination decision. You get a protection score at the end to see how many of your little neighbor character sprites you either protected or infected if you had chosen not to vaccinate. We made a stay-home edition for in April of this year, which brought this online, and that's the one that's linked through the Sensorium website. So the idea is that you take this kind of decision online, decide whether to stay home or go out, and again, you're infecting or protecting your neighbors, and then you go on to look at the sort of card collection of those who you infected or protected. And these cards were written by Caitlin Fisher with pictograms by Laramie Gann, and all of the game has real-world technology, real-world data behind it from Stephen Hoffman and his Global Strategy Lab. Cytokine Storm is basically the storytelling version of this, in which participants look at themselves as volunteers in a vaccine trial, and sort of think of what it would be like to be at the cutting edge of vaccine development. And we had 3 different locations on three continents. The Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, Debajamajig Storytellers, and the Desmond Tutu HIV Foundation Youth Center. So again, we're using this technology, but kind of using it as the stone in a stone soup. So, you know, looking at the Shadowpox and the Shadowpox vaccine, but then telling stories around it. So the participants would use the technology to build their stories around it. And then the third part is what I'm calling a course play, which is a full-term course at York that I'll be teaching in January, in which students will both study traditionally and create characters in this story world in which they play these volunteers in this vaccine trial who have been sort of outed by a resistance movement called the Project Cytokine, and sort of looking at what it feels like to be attacked that way. So we're also using AR filters to do this online. And that is Shadowpox in a nutshell.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alison. I just wanted to say, I realized halfway through that your slides actually weren't moving forward. We can just see your display. So if there's any images you want to just pull up quickly to show us, okay. Again, you're very welcome to do that quickly while we talk. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So yeah.
Just to let me know, what was it that you did see?
We just saw your title slide essentially. So, and then the bar on the side. So we've got small versions of the Shadowpox, but if there are any of the later images you wanted to bring back up.
Okay. Technology, we love it.
We've got your Twitter handle, so that's all that matters, right?
That's perfect, yep.
Perfect. If there's not anything that you wanted to pull up just briefly, I might roll into the questions. I've got a few myself, and then I've got a few coming in from the YouTube, and then Joel, I think, is keeping an eye on the Isea stream for us, right, Joel? So one of the first things I wanted to start off with is, because this panel is ostensibly about video games and art, I wanted to talk to each of you guys and get a sense of how, if you could talk about the role of games and play in your work, and tell us how you've integrated that and what effect it has on sort of the research and theory you're using. And maybe we'll start with Alison and work our way back down the line.
Oh, it's a fantastic question. It's basically, for me, not just games and play in terms of gameplay, but role play as well. So obviously the sort of early game that we created was a video game. It's a full body video game using motion tracking and projection, but it is still, you're kind of playing with a score and, you know, kind of more traditional video games. But then for the storytelling part of it, we're looking at kind of how role-playing works with gameplay, and especially how inhabiting a character who has chosen to become a vaccine trial volunteer, or indeed who then decides to leave that and then become part of the resistance, what it feels like from the inside, you know, rather than watching the news and sort of looking at vaccine hesitancy at arm's length in a kind of academic sense.
That's great. Thank you, Alison. Michaela?
For us, I mean, for me personally, as an XR creator, I think interactivity is the core of virtual reality for me. And so interactivity is also very, very clear or nearly connected to, very closely connected to play. And I think interactivity as well as playing, as well as experiencing and sentience, or sentience. I'm not sure what's the right English pronunciation. The second?
Sentience, I think. It's good, you got it.
So I think experiencing through interacting and through playing makes sentience even more like a deeper feeling in us. And we can emotionally connect much more, because also while playing, we are basically, it's personalized. We are in the medias res, right? We are in the action. And so we learn, we experience, we feel. It basically takes sort of a lived corporeality dimension, if I may say so. So that's why we use playing. It's not like in Symphony of Noise VR, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a game, but it's an experience where playing, because your body is an instrument and you play with your surroundings as a musician, but also in a playful way. So it has these two dimensions. I think, musical play is what maybe the strategy we used at Symphony of Noise.
Thank you. How about David?
I'd say that, I think as I mentioned in our intro, we're really interested in sort of what the body knows, what kind of knowledge the body holds, how we learn or perceive through the body, how we build so-called higher cognitive abstract functions of thought on this sort of base of our bodies moving through an environment. And I think that's something that we often take for granted, just because, we're always in these bodies in space. And I think what play allows us to do is defamiliarize that familiarity we have with sort of how we acquire knowledge through our bodies. So, I mentioned earlier that we worked in VR, and I think that in our earlier VR work, it's really centered on this idea of using play to defamiliarize how we might encounter the world through our bodies. And I think in this project, it's working in a very similar way, where as we get to encounter this movement in this environment, it's about defamiliarizing the movement in some way, and then allowing the interactivity that's provided through whether it's a game engine virtual world, whether it's through the VR technology, to defamiliarize it and see it again anew, and perhaps reflect upon how we might also gain knowledge through our bodies, the importance of that in sentience. So, yeah.
Can I actually push further on that question for all of you guys? You talked a bit about this idea of play and interactivity, but I wonder if you have thought about how the idea of play as like lightness and joyfulness and sort of the emotional level of play, how does that affect what you've been doing, if it affects it at all? Maybe we'll start with David and go back again.
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned, I feel like that process of defamiliarization occurs through the way that I think playful or joyful experiences tend to break down the barriers that we put up around ourselves. And it's also, I just feel like it's a sort of it's not forced. It's a sort of natural breaking down of those barriers, because we're not involved in asking ourselves to go through this process, right? I think you kind of get sucked into just enjoying an experience, and it's only in the sort of reflection afterwards I feel that realization might occur.
It's a very lovely way of putting it. Michaela, did you have some thoughts?
I will react on what David said, because that's so interesting how, when you create an interactive or want to create a playful piece, how do you create that spontaneity, that flow, that that naturalness of movement and, you know, interaction design. I mean, that was something we worked on for a long time, and it took, and I'm still not sure whether we managed, you know, like we tried to make it as playful as possible. Nonetheless, you always kind of fall back on directions, you know, what the user should do. Then they're kind of, sometimes they don't want directions, sometimes they miss the directions. So it's interesting. So we were, of course, that was one of the first things we were talking about, the interaction design and how to make it as playful and natural as possible. And especially if you want to use your body as an instrument, is that so logical or natural? And so that, like, the interactions coming from the body, you know, breathing is natural. You use breathing every day. So, but still that was kind of, you know, how to make breathing part of sound and part of the score and part of the, let's say, the visual design, and make it visible and like and graspable for the user. That was a challenge, and that was challenging each space, right? Like the easier was, I mean, in the third space you play drums on, you know, on a fridge. That was, I think, the easiest way to kind of make the user know, oh, you can just like, we just like put drums into your hands through the controllers, and it's logical, like right away you know what you should do. Whereas, you know, when we put like a cave in front of you, it's not necessarily like for everyone logical that they should scream or sing into it, right? So this was, we played a lot with what objects should we place in front of you and around you, so that you feel like you should interact with them in a certain way. And I think that's a challenge with every interactive piece.
And how do you also keep it feeling natural, right? Because once you start paying attention to your breath or the way that your body moves, or your surroundings and the way that you interact with your surroundings, it stops feeling natural, right? You start micromanaging it and overthinking things, and that becomes a problem on its own. Thank you, Michaela. That's lovely. So Alison, I know you definitely have some thoughts, and I think it's interesting to end on yours, because the topic, the concept behind it is so much further away from joyfulness and lightness.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, kind of been immersed in concept of viruses and vaccines for, you know, 5+ years, and you know, the way of using science fiction to just to lighten it up. I mean, it brings back to me, you know, playing superheroes with my brother when I was a kid, or playing Star Trek, and the concept kind of is, how do you make a vaccine? You take the virus and you attenuate it. You actually kind of change it and make it less virulent. And in a way, playing does that to a really hot topic like vaccine hesitancy or vaccine denialism, or indeed COVID denialism, as we're kind of seeing right now. And so trying to kind of give everybody an opportunity to take a deep breath and kind of cool the heat by saying, right, this is not COVID, this is Shadowpox. You know, even the name is a little bit silly. And I think a lot of people, as soon as they start playing in a superhero story world, they take themselves and the issue less seriously in a way, but it actually gives them a little bit more chance to look at it more clearly. So it's got this weird kind of contradiction that way.
You build a bit of distance between themselves and this topic that's quite difficult.
Exactly. And for me, one of the most important things is kind of civic education or civic literacy, in terms of how do you unknot polarization, right? If people have hardened into their camps of I believe this, screw the science, my people believe this, well, my people believe this, and you're just wrong. This is one way to kind of unknot that kind of really tense and calcified situation.
Yeah. This leads in really well, actually, to a few of the questions from our YouTube stream. Kenneth Rogers was asking about, for Alison specifically, how COVID has changed the scope of what you're doing and the project itself. But I'd also like to extend it to the other participants too, to ask, how has COVID and the pandemic lockdown situation maybe change the way that you think about your project? A couple of the other questions in the feed have asked about sort of the logistics of using VR right now when you can't share headsets, and that technology is still expensive enough that people can't really access this technology. So I'll start with Alison, and then we'll loop our way back. Just thinking about how COVID has affected what you're doing.
It affected it more than I can possibly describe. I mean, the kind of feeling of suddenly everybody's living in this science fiction story world that that used to be this little tiny weird niche thing off to the side. You know, the concept of herd immunity was something that I had spent a lot of time with the video game trying to help people think about. Well, nobody needs help thinking about herd immunity, except for perhaps if they're kind of thinking about it in a way of, well, it just means that we don't have to do anything. We just let the disease rip through the population and then magically we'll all be fine. So, you know, it kind of changed what I thought it was important to help us all think about together. And certainly for the last little while, it's been the disinformation, misinformation, polarization, especially through social media. And so how do you deal with the fact that algorithms are still built into the platforms through which we're communicating, and you know, kind of rev us up? You know, the idea that things are more sticky the more outrage they generate. So how do you kind of create a vaccine against outrage? The kind of funny thing is that the French for rabies was the first human created vaccine, is called la rage, rage. So kind of that's what I've been really trying to think about, especially with the course play for the next semester, and how students can really, really think about those kinds of emotions within a social media setting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alison. Michaela, let's move on to you. How has COVID affected how you're thinking about this project?
It hasn't affected it so concretely as Alison's. It has affected it immensely in its distribution and outreach, that's for sure. But I think that's what we're going to talk about like next, I guess. Regarding the concept itself, I would say it's we were planning to do a multi-user experience at the beginning when we were financing. And the idea of the project was actually to make a multi-user experience where you actually come together in like these different space, like put the headset on and from different spaces, but you know, come together in one space and actually, you know, make a symphony of noise together through your bodies. Like that was the initial concept, which due to financial reasons didn't happen. Because then we learned multi-user experiences are expensive. So I just wanted to say that I think the COVID situation, and especially the times of lockdowns and isolation, I think multi-user experiences are like gaining more importance. And I think you know, reconsidering, I think maybe we should have been put more pressure on the multi-user experience. Maybe we should have done it. Yeah, so that's, but I'm happy as it is. I'm proud of what we did, but yeah, I think multi-user would have had like a different emotional aspect, because, you know, interacting through your bodies and through the sound, it would have had this like communal aspect, which I think we all desire nowadays.
You don't have to, every project doesn't have to do everything all at the same time. You can have to leave something for the next one, right?
Yeah, my next one will be, I think, me and David, we need to talk. It's because it will be like also bodies and many bodies.
I love it. We'll just make connections through these conversations. Anyone else you want to talk to? We can set up another conversation. David, how about you? COVID. I know for sure your project was affected.
Yeah. So you know, initially when this exhibit was planned, the initial idea was to exhibit our earlier VR work after Dan Graham. That work is a physical VR installation, and it's an embodied VR installation where we use not only the VR headset and the controllers, but these external trackers that the user wears on their feet and their waist to track their entire body in a physical space. You know, when everything happened with the pandemic and everything got moved online, it just didn't seem like we could replicate that experience, given the fact that this technology is largely inaccessible. I mean, the market penetration for VR is still quite small, and especially when you start considering the external trackers, which are necessary for tracking the entire body. There's not many people have access to that particular technology. So, this is all to say that continuing to try to exhibit that work just didn't really make sense for this exhibit. And then, so, you know, we got to thinking about what we could do, and still sort of delve into this or investigate the same sort of ideas that we were interested in, but adapt it to our new online life. And, you know, at the time, I think this was back in April or May, you know, I was spending so much more time sitting in front of this camera, talking to little boxes with faces in them. And, you know, I was at that point, and when we shifted online, all of a sudden, instead of talking to students in a room, I was talking to, you know, most people didn't have their cameras on, so it was just names, like text on a screen. So it felt very alienating and strange. And so I think I became really interested in sort of what we were missing, what was being lost, and when we were forced into this scenario. So it really did kind of come full circle and to this idea that our encounters with an environment are just, that environment that we encounter through our bodies just got so much smaller and limited to this chair and this, you know, and this desk and this screen, you know. And so what are the impacts, right? You know, I think early on we started hearing things about, you know, Zoom fatigue, right? And sort of the differences between the kind of communications that we have like this, where we can't look someone in the eye, versus, you know, an in-person conversation, and all these sort of ideas. So that's really the genesis of this current project, is it really came out of our current situation and sort of how we were forced into this scenario. And I think that turning to dance artists who have been incredibly impacted by this pandemic, because, you know, a lot of these artists that I collaborated with, they are not only practicing artists, but they're also, a lot of them teach as well. They teach dance, and their teaching has all had to move online. And so you start to think about the impact on trying to teach an embodied art form like this instead of in person. You know, they've been heavily invested in these questions, and the pandemic has really affected both their professional and artistic practices, and so yeah, it just seemed natural to turn towards artists who have been impacted by this pandemic and kind of think through these issues together through this project.
And I can't express how grateful we are to David that he managed to build an entire new game system software between, I think we started talking about this in June, maybe even like July sometime, and he managed to actually finish it on time before things went live. And
it's not, it doesn't have everything that we had hoped, but the world's there, the dancers are there, the captured motion is there, and like I said, we're going to be updating it. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's still an accomplishment. And I think this is actually a good segue into one of the questions that we've received. And I sort of wanted to get you guys to touch on a little bit about the technology that you use and the platforms that you use, and sort of what the importance of that choice was, or how difficult the process was for you. I'm just going to read this question just to make sure that I articulate it properly. So it's a question specifically for David, but I think it's probably applicable to some of the other projects as well. I'm working in a similar environment for a project, but constructed with photogrammetries, sorry, from actual landscapes where, as an immigrant living in Montreal, and experienced feelings of belonging. My body will be scanned to be integrated into these landscapes. I'm a newbie in digital art, so can you talk a little bit about how did you manage to register movement for your project? So maybe for the other ones, we can just talk a little bit about any sort of technical challenges or successes that you found.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for this project, we used the same depth sensor that Alison used in her installation, the Connect. We've used the latest version of the Connect, which provides support for, so this is specifically for this person asking this question, provides support for tracking multiple users in a space. So these depth sensors, what they do is they send out structured light to capture the physical world in front of them. And they also have the ability to do skeletal tracking. So we use this to track all the joints in the dancers that we worked with, all the joints in their bodies over a specific amount of time. And that just gets recorded into a text file. And then we read that text file back into the Unity game engine and then applied it to the sort of avatar animation system that game engine uses. And I think that choice is interesting. I'm really, working with VR, working with this depth sensor, working with this game engine. I think I'm really interested in thinking about the limitations of all of this technology, right? Not only the possibilities, but the limitations where you start running into. So, for this project, the motion tracking fails at some points, right? It doesn't quite track the body as you hope. And I think that it fails in interesting ways. I'm very, I think that if I were making a game for release, I would be very frustrated with the way that it fails. But I think because I'm more interested in the experience and sort of how we can reach towards this sort of embodied knowledge, what are the possibilities and limitations of the technology allows us to reach towards this embodied knowledge. I'm interested in also the way that it fails, right? And representing that failure. So if in this project, you'll see that there's these sort of effects that are applied to the motion, and sort of when it fails, you'll see that these effects actually have a stronger visual effect on screen. Because the joints sort of jump around very quickly in a way that a human body just doesn't in real life. So there's definitely a lot of thought into considering the impact of that choice of technology and how it might impact the project itself.
Great, thank you, David. Michaela, what are your thoughts?
I will a little bit, like I will share the screen because I just found the walkthrough and I just feel that I was the only one not sharing anything. So I'll just play it while I talk a little bit. So basically, I put this on mute. So basically the technology, it's exactly what David was saying, that the challenges become kind of part of the experience. And so at the beginning, we were thinking, how can we use it all without controllers, without any trackers? Let's use Magic Leap, right? Which Magic Leap is a camera that you put on the headset and it can track your hands. But then we thought, but it tracks only the hands. And what happens if the hands are not high enough? Or, what happens if the user, so that was like challenge 1. Challenge 2 was so then we decided to go for controllers because people know the controllers, right? And we also use trackers that David used also for his previous experience, which we put on the feet of the user, and then we tested the prototype during one of the festivals, and basically the trackers were falling off. They, some of them got broken. Some people were afraid to walk in VR because, the insecurity, you don't know where you are. So that was a challenge. So then we got rid of the trackers. And of course, then the sound aspect was a big challenge because basically what you see now also on the screen is, like you had to breathe into this, for instance, into the bubble, which like at the big, like the headset, the HTC Vive didn't pick up the breath. So then we added like additional microphone. And then like after maybe like a year of testing, and going through the project, we finally managed to create the sound like that the sound gets picked up. Like we managed that you don't need an extra microphone, that your breath gets picked up and your voice gets picked up. And so there were so many. And the last but not least, we started, so we also did it in Unity, and then the sound interactions were done in Maximus P, which is another software. And so basically we had these 2 parallel pieces of software running next to each other. And then we thought, yes, but how are we going to put them together for the users to be able to download them from Steam or like anywhere else? And then we realized, okay, the only option is to make one Unity build from that. So we spent like another, we spent some time and some budget on basically on putting that all together into one Unity file so that we can release it on Steam, and so that, people now can download it and use it on one headset and not necessarily having to put trackers on and microphones and biometric devices. We also wanted to measure heartbeats. There were a lot of ideas. I stopped sharing now.
I'm sure for all of these projects too, the way that you did it is probably not the way that you would do it again if you had to start from scratch, right? Like all of these are a learning experience, and you get to know the technology, and suddenly in the middle of it, a new technology appears that you would have been better had you had it from the start, but too late. Thank you so much, Michaela. That was really great, and it's really interesting to hear how all of these technical issues sort of help to build the project conceptually. Alison, did you have some thoughts you wanted to add?
Sure, yeah. Let me try one more time to see if I can do a share screen and share you more than one slide. Let's try this here. All right.
Ah, perfect. That works better. Yeah.
So are you seeing more than one slide?
I'm seeing more than one slide. They're bodies with projection mapping on them. Perfect. I think that one's you.
That is me. That is me in Graham Wakefield's lab with Lorraine working on the getting the motion tracker, which is the Microsoft Kinect, which, as you say, things change. Microsoft discontinued the Kinect sort of partway through our project, but it still works so far. So that's kind of getting the projector to project exactly where you think your body is. And so that allows us to project the Shadowpox onto the body. There's a little bit of spill onto the screen behind her, you can see there. But as you can see over her shoulder, there's sort of what happens when the Shadowpox leaves the body and it kind of breaks up and dies. So that's kind of like fighting the virus as the concept. So here's some of the images from one of our very early workshops at RADA. And then again, we used the Kinect tracker in the game with the projector projecting on a screen in front of you so that you can actually kind of mirror what's being done. And then the sprites walking around. This was coded by Lorraine in Open Frameworks. But then when we actually came to the online version, oops, she ported it to JavaScript, so using Pixie.js and HTML canvas. And then for the storytelling part, we've been using Scalar and then adapting the effects once again into AR filters through Lens Studio and Spark AR. So yeah, each one of those was an opportunity to kind of rethink what do you make with this technology? You know, long ago in my MFA, I did a Midsummer Night's Dream with 100 people, and we were all using kind of fairy magic with motion tracking stuff on stage. And it's a lot of work and it's expensive. I mean, as an art form, all this stuff is more expensive than a lot of different things. Like maybe not more than bronze casting, right? Where you have to have like a whole board, but it's hard. So you have to have a good reason why you're doing it. What stories can you tell? What experiences can you create that you just can't create with something else? So whenever I'm working with students, I kind of ask them, what is it that you need this to do? Rather than just replicating something that you could create by painting it or by dancing it.
That's such a really lovely way to wrap this up. We're coming up very close to the end of this, but I think it's important to think about what the technology is that you're using it. And the medium is always important, whether you're doing painting or printmaking or dance, right? Like you're choosing your medium to express your ideas in the best possible way. Joel, you can probably just message in the chat, but I'm not sure if you wanted to wrap anything up at the end. I just had one more question I wanted to ask all of the participants before we wrap up. Obviously, this exhibition is being done by Sensorium, Center for Digital Arts and Technology. It's a research institute at York University. And all three of you are doctoral students working within this research institute. So I was wondering if you could talk just briefly about how Sensorium has affected your research or some of the ideas that you're thinking about, and if you have any next steps for your projects. And then Joel, I think we'll wrap everything up. So start with Alison and we'll go back one last time.
Oh man, so going back to the experience that I had doing my master's and using technology in an art form, live theater, that doesn't always make it obvious. I did sometimes feel like I was this weird fringe creature, kind of bringing things into this ancient art form that that really didn't belong there. And so it's really kind of nice to be in Sensorium in a geek-friendly environment where people they see no kind of contradiction between technology, scholarship, and artistic exploration. So that for me has been a really, really great community experience. And sort of next steps are, I'm looking at creating a, what I'm calling a Shadowpox multiplex. Multiplex, in cinema, we think of it, it's like a thing with a lot of different screens, showing a lot of different movies, but in epidemiology, in biology, a multiplex assay is something that you use to test one sample, one blood sample or whatever else, for many different kinds of antibodies. And so I'm looking at this as a kind of metaphor for antibodies of belief and the things that help us to either believe a story that we're told or disbelieve it, to distrust it. Obviously, antibodies come from a prior brush with a harm, with a pathogen. So there might be a story that we don't want to suspend our disbelief for because someone, hurt us in the past, or someone hurt our parents, our ancestors. So we have like the Tuskegee study. There are people who have, real distrust about medical research because of that. So kind of how does that affect our willingness to believe or disbelieve?
Thank you so much, Alison. Michaela?
So I would say the same thing or similar thing as Alison said. I think Sensorium enriched me. I was a first year's PhD student, international student, so I didn't know many people. And so I was really thankful that Joel and Alana took me in with open arms and gave me so much support. And meeting all of you, I met Melanie, you through them, and Alison and David. Of course, we're also at the same department, but I think Sensorium gives us much more, many opportunities to network and to meet also people from other departments from the university. And so basically what happened was actually during one of our Sensorium talks, when I presented Symphony and another project that I co-produced, Chomsky versus Chomsky, two undergrad female software engineering students came up to me and said, "Oh, we love what you're doing. Can we talk?" And what happened is in the past 6 months, they are now collaborators with me, and we're collaborating together. And they are we're going to start building the prototype for my research creation project this in January. So yeah, so thanks for Sensorium. That's an immense enrichment to my project and to our work and collaborations within in between departments.
That's so amazing to hear. It's always nice to hear when weird connections get made and actually turn into something real, right? A project that's going to happen. Thank you, Michaela. David, you get the last word.
I just want to echo both Michaela and Alison's thoughts on Sensorium. I think that it's just a wonderful community of like-minded individuals. And I think that for me, what has been the most beneficial is the conversations I've had from people from other disciplines, just widely different disciplines or but finding the sort of intersection of in this sort of ideas of art and technology, but coming at it from all these different perspectives, I think has really been beneficial for me in helping me think about positioning my own thoughts and enriching my own thoughts from those other perspectives. And in terms of next step for this project, we're going to continue building it out, the game world, and adding various forms of interaction with the movement. and also potentially adding the ability to make this a world that could be populated by more than just you, perhaps networking through the network, accessing it from other spots. But yeah, I intend to continue to work with the depth sensor that we used for capturing this motion once once we get to the point where we can start meeting together in person, and we can start visiting installations in person. I'm very, very excited about thinking about how the VR space, when you're in a headset, is also a real world space, obviously, that is being experienced by people who don't have the headset on, and the sort of overlapping of those two spaces. And I think that what the Kinect sensor does allows us to sort of think about how those two spaces can start to interact with each other. So
that poor Kinect is doing so much work for something that's obsolete. Gonna have to look to the next technology. All right, thank you guys so much. I'm sorry we went 6 minutes over, but we're wrapping up. Thank you to everyone who stuck around to watch the feed either through YouTube or through Isea. Thank you to David, Michaela, and Alison for this wonderful conversation. That's actually my favorite part of Sensorium, is just being able to have these chats with all of the fantastically smart people who are working with them and throwing ideas around. Sorry. Thank you so much. I'm just going to pass it off to Joel for the last few words, and thank you all for joining us.
Sure. Hey, thank you so much. Don't have very much to add. I just want to say that please continue to keep in touch with us. Go on our website and sign up for our mailing list, sensorium.ampd.yorku.ca. And I also want to say that through Isea, you can get in touch with David, Alison, and Michaela. David's name, however, is Friend Generator. That's for the collective that he is part of. So please feel free to continue asking us questions, and let's keep this conversation alive. Thank you so much, guys, for your attention.